Paris stood within a broad basin crossed by the Seine, where gentle elevations shaped movement, commerce, and settlement patterns. The river divided the city into northern and southern districts while linking Paris with regional trade networks. Two islands, the Ile de la Cité and Ile Saint-Louis, remained historic centers within the urban structure. By 1760, Paris ranked among Europe's largest cities, with a population approaching 600,000 inhabitants. The city extended beyond medieval boundaries that earlier fortifications had once defined and defended through previous centuries. Older walls had largely given way to expanding boulevards that reshaped circulation and public urban space. Paris served as the administrative heart of the Kingdom of France and the residence of powerful institutions. Royal authority operated through ministries, courts, tax systems, and offices that directed activity throughout the kingdom. Yet political authority remained divided between monarchy, legal institutions, church structures, and privileged social bodies. The Parlement of Paris exercised judicial influence and frequently challenged royal measures through legal objections and delays. Despite the modern meaning of parliament, this institution functioned primarily as a high court rather than legislature. Its authority increasingly shaped disputes involving royal power and administrative reform during the late Ancien regime. The Seine formed a commercial artery carrying food, construction materials, wine, and goods toward urban markets. River. Access linked Paris with inland agricultural regions and distant routes, supplying the expanding metropolitan population. Geography therefore reinforced Paris as both a political center and an economic exchange point within France. Markets around Les Halles supplied vast quantities of grain, produce, meat, and goods to city residents. The grain trade carried unusual significance because bread represented the primary food source for many households. Small changes in harvest conditions could quickly influence prices and produce broader social consequences across neighborhoods. Economic stability, therefore, depended partly upon supply systems extending far beyond the city itself. Guild organizations regulated numerous trades, including textiles, metalworking, furniture production, and skilled artisan professions. Production systems remained controlled through traditions governing labor practices, training standards, and market participation. Economic activity reflected hierarchy as much as productivity within 18th century Parisian society. Luxury industries also operated across Paris, producing goods destined for aristocratic households and foreign markets. French textiles, decorative objects, and crafted products contributed significantly to elite consumption and commercial reputation. The city therefore contained both extreme wealth and extensive populations facing financial insecurity. Social. Life operated within the structure known as the three estates of the French kingdom. The first estate consisted of clergy holding religious responsibilities and substantial institutional privileges. The church controlled significant land holdings and exercised influence across education, welfare, and administration. The second estate included nobility who maintained legal privileges and extensive influence within state institutions. Many senior military and administrative positions remained dominated by noble families and inherited social status. The third estate contained nearly everyone else, including merchants, laborers, professionals, and ordinary workers. Population diversity created major differences even within this broad social category. Some members of the bourgeoisie accumulated wealth through finance, commerce, and administrative positions. Others experienced unstable employment and difficult living conditions across crowded sections of the city. Urban inequality therefore reflected structural conditions rather than isolated cases of hardship. Housing conditions varied sharply between aristocratic residences and densely occupied lower-income districts. Narrow streets and concentrated populations intensified sanitation concerns throughout many areas of Paris. Crowding produced persistent pressures upon public health, infrastructure, and everyday urban life. These conditions increasingly influenced discussions about reform and governance during the late 18th century. The intellectual environment of Paris also carried unusual importance during this period. Publishing, salons, and philosophical discussion expanded across educated circles throughout the city. Thinkers associated with the Enlightenment circulated ideas concerning law, government, and social organization. Printed works moved through networks that sometimes operated beyond direct state control. Government censorship existed, yet authorities frequently struggled to restrict circulation completely. Ideas questioning established institutions, therefore, spread alongside traditional structures of authority. Paris became a center where intellectual activity and political concerns increasingly intersected. Meanwhile, King Louis XV continued ruling France during the early years of this period. His government faced growing difficulties involving administration, finance, and institutional resistance. Conflicts increasingly emerged between royal officials and the Parlement of Paris regarding political authority. These disputes reflected larger tensions concerning governance within the kingdom itself. In 1771, Chancellor René de Maupeou moved against judicial opposition through sweeping institutional measures. Royal agents removed members of the Parlement and reorganized judicial structures through state intervention. These actions represented a significant assertion of centralized royal authority over resistant institutions. Administrative reforms attempted to reduce obstacles limiting governmental action across France. The changes also demonstrated increasing friction between monarchy and privileged groups. Institutional conflict therefore became a visible feature of political life before revolutionary transformation. Economic issues simultaneously affected governance during the closing years of Louis XV's reign. State finances remained under pressure from debt obligations and administrative expenditures. Fiscal reforms often encountered resistance from groups possessing privileges and legal protections. Taxation burdens remained unevenly distributed throughout French society during this period. The Third Estate carried much of the tax responsibility despite representing the overwhelming population majority. This imbalance produced long-term political consequences extending beyond immediate financial concerns. In May 1774, Louis XV died and succession passed to Louis XVI. The transition introduced a younger monarch into an increasingly complicated political environment. Louis XV inherited structural challenges rather than isolated administrative problems. Questions concerning reform, authority, and finance already shaped discussions throughout governing circles. The new reign began under expectations that meaningful change might become possible. Louis XVI restored the Parlements after the earlier Maupeou reforms had displaced them. That decision strengthened institutions, which later complicated efforts toward broader governmental reform. Political choices therefore generated consequences, extending well beyond immediate circumstances. Geography again shaped political life because Paris concentrated institutions within a limited urban space. Officials, legal bodies, intellectual networks, and markets operated within close physical proximity. Information therefore moved rapidly through conversation, printed material, and institutional interaction. This concentration amplified disputes and accelerated the circulation of emerging political concerns. Meanwhile, Parisian society continued displaying visible contrasts between privilege and labor. Carriages carrying aristocrats traveled streets shared with vendors, workers, and artisans seeking employment. Economic systems connected these populations while preserving substantial social separation. Such divisions increasingly became subjects of criticism among writers and educated observers. By the 1780s, financial pressures within the French state grew increasingly difficult to manage. Costs from war and accumulated debt intensified concern within administrative and ministerial circles. Efforts at reform encountered repeated resistance from institutions defending established privileges. Political conflict increasingly centered upon authority to approve taxation and structural changes. These disputes carried implications extending beyond administrative procedure into broader questions of legitimacy. Paris therefore entered a period where institutional weakness became increasingly visible. Public discussion expanded as governmental uncertainty intersected with economic and social pressures. Long-standing structures appeared durable, yet evidence of strain became increasingly difficult to ignore. By the late 1780s, unresolved tensions across Paris had reached an important historical midpoint. Political transformation accelerated across Paris after the tensions that had marked the late years of royal government. Financial crisis had already weakened confidence in institutions before revolutionary events reached the center of national authority. In May 1789, representatives gathered at Versailles for the Estates General, summoned to address severe fiscal difficulties. The assembly had not met since 1614, reflecting the exceptional nature of France's institutional crisis. Disputes quickly emerged concerning voting procedures and representation between the traditional social estates of the kingdom. Members of the Third Estate increasingly viewed existing procedures as obstacles to political reform and broader representation. On 17th June 1789, representatives of the Third Estate declared themselves the National Assembly. This decision marked a major constitutional challenge to older assumptions concerning royal and institutional authority. Days later, deputies gathered at an indoor tennis court after finding their meeting hall inaccessible. There they pledged not to separate before establishing a constitutional framework for France. Political legitimacy increasingly shifted from inherited structures toward claims grounded in national representation and public authority. Geography again shaped events because Paris and Versailles stood close enough for political tensions to spread rapidly. Communication networks, roads, and commercial routes connected public discussion with centers of governmental decision-making. Meanwhile, severe pressure continued affecting food supplies and urban household conditions throughout the region surrounding Paris. Bread prices remained critically important because ordinary families depended upon grain for daily survival. Economic pressure carried political consequences when shortages affected large populations living within dense urban districts. Rumors spread through markets and neighborhoods as uncertainty increased among workers and lower-income residents. The concentration of people within Paris accelerated the movement of information, fear, and political interpretation. Royal troop movements around Paris generated additional concern during the summer of 1789. Many residents interpreted military preparations as possible threats against emerging political changes. Public distrust therefore expanded beyond economics into wider concerns regarding state intentions and governmental power. On 14th of July 1789, Parisian crowds moved against the Bastille fortress and prison. Although the prison held few inmates, the structure represented royal authority within the capital. Its fall carried symbolic importance far beyond immediate military significance or practical strategic value. Political consequences followed quickly as royal authority appeared increasingly vulnerable before organized public action. Louis XVI traveled to Paris and accepted revolutionary symbols associated with changing political realities. This recognition reflected a shifting balance between monarchy and increasingly assertive public forces. Events within Paris also influenced developments extending across the wider French countryside. During the Great Fear, reports and rumors generated rural unrest in many regions of France. Political instability in Paris therefore produced consequences, extending through geographic networks far beyond the capital. In August, reform efforts accelerated within the National Constituent Assembly. Feudal privileges and long-standing obligations faced major challenges during legislative discussions. The Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen followed later that month. These measures represented attempts to redefine relations between citizens, institutions, and political authority. Yet immediate economic problems continued despite constitutional developments and institutional restructuring. Food scarcity and rising bread prices still shaped everyday conditions across Parisian neighborhoods. By October, frustration increasingly concentrated among market communities responsible for household food purchases. On 5th of October 1789, thousands marched from Paris toward Versailles, demanding bread and political action. Women from Parisian marketplaces formed a major part of this movement. The protest reflected immediate economic demands while becoming connected with wider political developments. The following day, members of the royal family returned from Versailles to Paris. The National Assembly also relocated, placing political authority closer to revolutionary pressure inside the capital. Versailles gradually lost its previous role as the principal center of royal political life. This geographic transfer carried substantial political consequences for the future direction of events. Paris increasingly became the center where national politics and public action directly intersected. Institutional authority now operated within an environment shaped by intense public observation and pressure. Political leaders worked under conditions very different from earlier decades of royal administration. The movement of government toward Paris reflected a broader redistribution of political influence. Long-term consequences extended beyond individual events and transformed expectations regarding political participation. Public action increasingly appeared capable of influencing decisions once controlled by traditional institutions. Revolutionary developments between 1789 and 1790 therefore reshaped relationships among geography, power, and society. Paris entered a new historical phase whose consequences would continue influencing France far beyond this period.